Hi there, Randi Green here, and welcome to another podcast where we are approaching the higher awareness lifestyle from the angle of why do we do the progression work, right? And years ago, when I began this work, aside from feeling a pull towards it and have already had the skills for it as a kid, in that understanding of what we would call clairvoyant abilities, super sensitivity, being empathic and understanding world from a completely different perspective within what we would call a neurodivergent approach to reality, self and others. I have promised you that I would begin to use a different language, and I will do that altogether because why did I even begin the work? What was the whole approach of the higher awareness lifestyle? What was the end goal of it? Was it to end up in some new form of deviant type of spiritual teaching system? Or was it actually to try and expand my awareness capacity? And of course, it was the latter. It was this inbuilt feeling that humans can be more, humans can do more, humans should do more, as in being a 10 times more expanded and inclusive type of human being that can and will and are eager to explore reality with all of our senses and not just the tangible senses, not just through taste and hearing and seeing and smelling and the tangible sense, but also from the higher order senses. That means not just clairvoyance, because that's just the beginning of it. That's where we could say the emotional field in the peripheral nervous system kicks off and becomes super sensitive. Animals have that as well. They are technically clairvoyant. They don't have brain processes as we do, and in many ways our brain processes stand in the way to a large degree. And I kind of understood that from early on, considering that my approach to reality was different than other people. Not that I in any ways or forms, again, will say, even though I use the terminology neurodivergent, doesn't mean that it goes into saying, oh, that's ADD or ADHD or ASD or whatever of the new types of classification system that people operate within. It's not the typical understanding of what we call a neurological divergence, where the neurons fire in a specific way, where there are what we call the pruning of, or the residual cleansing of the neural network doesn't work as it's supposed to, and whatever other explanations that science comes up with. That's not where I want to go. But there were two main things that I wanted to use my expanded awareness for. And that was not to end up in a new spiritual teaching system, which I kind of got myself painted into a corner with, which is a process I have been with my eyes wide open stepped into, because I understood long time ago, if I want to expand my awareness, I need to find that system that enables me to do so. And it was not because I wanted to have powers or mind over matter or kinetic processes, because I was already semi-clairvoyant. I'd seen a lot of stuff already as a kid. And by that, I knew that the world was larger than what most people saw. I kept it to myself, though, because I kind of understood. Remember, I'm from 68, so I kind of understood, yeah, probably not what I need to tell out there. Plus, my childhood was, compared to others, of course, kind of okay. There are always people that are worse off than us, right? But since I was a very sensitive child and I was already thinking in different ways, it made me susceptible for not really fitting in. And with that also, of course, dealing with some of the stresses that were going on in my childhood home. Mom and dad that were not happy and always in some kind of verbal row with each other and being very unhappy, which set an energy of unhappiness in, sorry about that, in my home. You see, you can hear this kind of little voice thing there, because in a way I don't want to go into my childhood in here on YouTube, because I've done it in more my private classes and it's not a secret, but there are these things that we share publicly and then the things we just say, that's for another context. Point being, I was stressed in my childhood home, and that set my adrenaline glands off most of the time. I did not feel safe. I did not feel I belong. I did not feel that this world were for me. And with that, it pushed me into studies. It pushed me into a different inner world. It pushed me into an understanding of, okay, I might not fit in here, but is there another place I fit in? And that started my search. And we all have these kick-offs as kids that sets us in a specific direction, or whatever that is. It's kind of chiseled into our neural network from childhood on. It's in the early instinctual limbic layers of our brains. And that in many ways controls our later experiences of life, including how well we manage to jump from the limbic system to the frontal lobes, where we mature and become these considerate, understanding, inclusive grown-ups that are able to perceive the world from many different angles. And then the last part of it, and that's the higher order or awareness, or the expanded awareness, as I would like to call it, because I want to go with two levels. We could call it the higher order awareness. We could also call it the higher order psychic energetic awareness, which is what I will work with in the Higher Order Density 1 Work Institute, where I will work with different forms of what we call parapsychological processes. So that's where I begin to say, okay, I want to take these abilities that I've developed, these different levels of seeing reality, as I always have had, but through my work and my studies and all the things I've engaged myself into, and all of you that have done scientific work, you also know that you refer, if you do kind of a scientific paper, I was never good at doing scientific papers anyways, because that kind of limited mindset where you try to argue an approach by using other people that have said the same, and then that create that paradigm in which you repeat each other's work that has been put in, has been got the hallmark. This is the proper way to think scientifically. These are the proper theories. Well, then that excludes sorry about that. That excludes more or less again, a little block on my voice here. That excludes 70% or more of new thinking processes, not necessarily critical thinking processes, but processes that are fringe, that are parallel to, and that's why I want to use the word para or parascientific. So it is thought forms that many have thought, and we have got evidence of. That's why I began and completed my bachelor degree in theology, because I wanted to see, okay, my foundational idea was actually when I early on looked into the Bible, even though I kind of thought that, no answers there whatsoever, but I knew the translations was inaccurate. I knew there was something hidden, and then I started to read it that's why I did the theology studies at the Copenhagen University, because I wanted to learn the scholastic way of interpreting and reading the Bible, both in its ancient Greek, ancient Latin, and ancient Hebrew, which I did. And I made it, and I got my bachelor degree. And in that, also discovering, well, ancient languages are deciphered in a specific way because the scholars have decided this is how it's supposed to be deciphered. We don't really know these ancient languages. Similar with Pali, we don't really know how it was before it began. They wrote it down. How was the earliest version of it? Because we are dealing with oral or verbal traditions. So most of the secret text of what most people have been talking about in the early ages, where we have these secret societies, whatever they have been, from where people were trying to achieve some kind of expanded awareness. And why was it that they wanted this expanded awareness? And that was because we used to have it and we lost it. And that's the search for the Holy Grail. It's not about the blood of Christ. We could say that is an analogy of the original genetic composition that leads to the higher order awareness, that leads to our full capacity as human beings. And with that also understanding, which was some of the early work I began in Denmark, in Danish, where I tried to bridge science with the not paranormal, but parascientific, because paranormal has now been kind of labeled something that's just with ghosts and weird stuff, right? But we're here talking about parasciences and parapsychology more than the paranormal. Because paranormal, para means parallel, it's Greek and it means parallel or alongside with. So this is where we have two paths, and that's why it had that name on the original domain name is means two ways. It means these two, you can either go left or you can go right, or you can, these two parallel ways of perceiving reality that needs to bridge at some point. And why do I feel it's important that they bridge at some point? That's because if we only stay within the limited mindset of the frequency spectrum, we are missing 95% of what the universe is about. That's a huge chunk, people. We're only operating within a minimum of 4 or 5% of reality that we can perceive because we are limiting ourselves to work within the frequency spectrum. And science knows that. They know dark energy and dark matter, and they are now looking up at the schematics of this neural network, similar type of network that is within dark energy, and trying to figure out what that is. And then they will discover that these different nodal points that are there are also the ones that are the foundation of galaxies that are not within the frequency spectrum. Because our universal structure is close to the abyss. It is in its entropy phase. It is dustification phase. So this is where we again begin to say, okay, hey, there's something going on here. Why with the outskirts of the universe where everything has been sucked into black holes? Hey, perhaps there's something we should blah, 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 wake up and see. So that's kind of where I began this. It was not to create this quasi-spiritual teaching system, what have you, that it in a way began with. Because once I began to, those of you who go far back with me, you know that when I began in 2013 making a podcast here on YouTube, back then it was videos. And then the camera changed and the pixelation got so high that one video consumed everything. And I know why that is. And there are reasons and purposes why it's prudent not to put ourselves out there so everybody can look at you with what you look at, you give energy, right? And if people are looking at you with malice or they're looking at you in a specific way, all these energies are typically sent to you. So it's easier just to listen. And sometimes people actually focus more when they listen. They work, their brain processes work in a different way. It develops kind of what we could say images that might not always be accurate, but there is a deeper process in listening. And it's more difficult just to listen and understand than it is to look at someone, all depending on if you're auditory or you're visual. I'm a very visual person, so I had to teach myself, train how to listen and perceive information by listening instead of looking, because I have been used to just looking at things, and in that saw things clairvoyantly and saw it in my mind's eye, saw it with my expanded awareness that I already had glimpses of as a kid. But of course, it was locked down due to the traditional schooling system, because it's not built into the schools yet, is it? So with that also, again, talking about dreams, that as a kid, I used to dream again and again and again. Later on, when I began my deeper psychological work, was I kept having these dreams of where I understood that school took away something very important for me. It took away half of who I was. It classified me. It narrowed me down into specific thought processes where my brain didn't work well. So that's been part of my process of the expansion, has been to change my neural network. That was the most important thing. And once I began that journey, then I began to reconnect with the other levels of reality where I encountered different, what we could call otherworldly beings, beginning with the astral plane and working my way through there. Due to the Alice Bailey material, I knew there were different steps, even though I thought to the core of my being that her system was inaccurate. I read the teachers on cosmic fire, and I just thought, yeah, that's not going to build the bridge to science. They tried as well. The esoterics at the time, they tried to build bridges to science. Annie Besant and Charles W. Leadbeater, they were also working on looking at atoms clairvoyantly and came up with some pretty good drawings of how they perceived it, even though I also look at these and say, yeah, they're also inaccurate. But they kind of knew that the atomic structure that we are being brain fed with is inaccurate because it's a cluster of energy where we have the electrons that are kind of popping in and out of reality. They're not always there. They are not just virtual, but they are within these, we call them rings, but that's technically also inaccurate. But we could say different kind of positions within the cloud of the atom or that holds a core or a nucleus of protons and the neutron. The neutron is the center of it. The proton is the one that energizes it, so to speak. And then we have the electrons that are popping in and out of reality and creating dynamics. So that's the one that whirls around the nucleus. But these electrons, they are all over the place. They can be here and there and everywhere. And that's why we get the entanglement principles. And we get this, that they can be in what we call, 2 different localities or non-local and still interconnected, still talking or communicating with each other across distances. And that's why we begin to understand, okay, we're talking about clusters of energy that are not really visible to the human eye. And they are imbued with enormous amount of what we understand to be emptiness, which later on, of course, will be proven to be dark energy. It's not emptiness, it's dark energy that's in between the orbits of the electrons. And they run specific networks that are tied to what they later will understand as holographic network. And then we can begin to bridge reality together, because then we can say, okay, we actually got the nucleus, we have got the frequency energies as we know of the electromagnetic powers and the 4 forces, and we kind of know how that one works. But that is superimposed or part of a huge field of holographic networks that works with holographic properties, not 2-dimensional event lines has been thought about with black holes, but actually holographic properties where the unit contains the image of the everything it's part of, where the seed has the whole code system for the tree it's going to become later on. And these nodal points are where these different vibrational forces that runs what we could say when we look at the electrons and the protons and the neutrons, that's a point zero field. That's also the basic level of the universal structure. It is technically the 3rd cycle energy, old holographic network ties into that. So in here, in this reality, is kind of a stale point. And then the proton is the artificial, what we would, we still call it density 2 or LPF2 type of energy that were imbued into this system. That is with the rings of the sun that are now collapsing. And I will here absolutely give credit to the Ashanadine material and the Guardian Alliances that at the time in 2007 gave the information that the rings around the sun were collapsing. I will absolutely give credit to that, because that is a piece of information nobody else put out there. So that I will refer to as that came from Ashanadine, and that was one of the free podcasts or videos that I put on YouTube at the time where I got that information. But I didn't understand it at the time. That information, I think it is from the Carrie Cassidy interview she did with Ashanadine. That's still out there somewhere. So that's these 3 interviews that Carrie Cassidy did with Ashanadine are absolutely worth seeing, even though that when I looked at the way that the crystalline races, the ones that are behind the Guardian Alliances, the way that they have, and I call it crystalline because they are both working with what they call the crystal energies, which I don't understand. And they also work with the way I see their representation of the universal structure, the way I see the representation of time matrices and the holographic network as it works, is for me very similar to what I remember the Syrian bees were working with. So that's how I see it, and that's why I call it crystalline, because the Syrian bees work with science in a specific way, not as portrayed by Ashana Dean, but I could see remnants of some of the graphics she has put out there are similar to the ones that some of the original Celtic lineages were working with, what their lineage were supposed to unfold as part of their universal lineage structure, the way they work with consciousness. These, what we could call schematic representation of the universal structure, which can differ all depending on what type of genetics we have got. So we can't just say, well, that's one for all. It isn't. That's for the Syrian bees. That's how they work with their reality. That's why I can say that's the crystallines. And they work with these different types of holographic features that they encapture in different what we call types of symbols that are very similar to, if you look at the water crystals and other types of crystals, if we could see them outside of their frequency spectrum, they become fluid and round and begin to morph in and out of reality in a different way. There you will begin to have that. But these type of technologies that the crystallines came up with will always, unfortunately, crystallize. They will go into evaporation. So they're still in that. How do they transform their crystalline form of energy back into plasma or to fires, as the Alice Bailey material called it? A terminology she got from Madame Blavatsky, that energy must turn back into a different form of fire where it can become transformative or transmutive. So these are not, again, this is why when we talk about, okay, Randi, where have you got your information from? Well, portions of my information are from what I remember. Others is what we could say mirrored in some of the systems I have studied. And that's why when people say, well, Randi, why are you not saying you studied it from that person and then refer to that person as it would be done in what we could call scientific manner? Because it's not their information. They have just been a confirmation of what I already knew. Similarly as if you take Einstein. He had his ideas already, but he was fringe at the time where he came. Not that I say Einstein thumbs up, not at all, but he went in, he had some specific ideas. And not only until someone else came up with a similar idea could he express what he fully knew, and then he made it his system. And that's completely normal within science. If you take something, of course you say, this is similar to what they have made, but this is something different. This is a different approach. This is something that is uniquely different compared to the way that they work with this. Or we could also say, well, since the first person that expressed the atoms, that's one of the Greeks, by the way, one of the Greek philosophers, came up with the word atom. But today we perceive atoms as something different. That Greek person, which I forgot I forgot his name, some Greek philosopher, you can look that up, who coined the first word atom, Greek philosopher. And then it will come up with his name, because I can't remember all of these names of all the things I've studied. And that's what science do as well. At some point, unless you are writing a paper, you will then say, well, in the speech of what you're talking about, we have moved beyond and now we have added more into it. Similar to your human language. If you are to give credit to every single teacher in your life that had taught you mathematics or whatever, there would be no communication. Just to put that in, so we also have that in context, because I've been accused again and again or more than once, let's put it that way, that I have taken my material from others. And in a matter of fact, it's like we have a joint history here, people. If you are going out there, you're talking about reality to someone else, will someone then accuse you of having stolen it from someone? And the ones that accuses you of stealing something, aren't they really the ones that have stolen it to begin with? Just so we kind of look into this whole, who came up with the idea first? Who invented the egg? The hen or the chicken? Who came up with it? We don't really know, because it's part of our ancient history. And that's where these scientists come in. That's for me and you say, well, that's just a sad excuse, Randi. So I will do better if I do have something that I can give credit to, as with the Rings of the Sun, that uniquely belongs to Ashana Dean and the Guardian Alliances. The information they gave her, because it's not her invention. It's what the Guardian Alliances gave to her. And I can't remember what they were called at the time, because they shifted too into different other organs as she moved along within the different bands of energy. Then the speakers became the channels of, and I know Ashana D kept saying, I'm not channeling this, I get it as zip files. That is what she says in the Carrie Cassidy interview. So there she says, Ashana Dean says in the Carrie Cassidy interview that you can find on YouTube under Carrie Cassidy Project Avalon, that she says, sorry, not Avalon, that was the one she did with, that's what Carrie Cassidy did with her partner, but Project Camelot, sorry about that, Project Camelot. And there, Ashana Dean says that her information is given to her by the Guardian Alliances, which is a group of otherworldly or extraterrestrial or metaterrestrial or superterrestrial or hyperterrestrial, what do I know, races beyond this realm. When I saw some of the information out there from Anna Hayes, which I actually prefer to call her, because there was a human being still present inside that human form that were talking about the different alien races and how she had got that information. And that's very similar to others that also talked about that at the same time. At some point, Anna Hayes changed into Ashana Dean, and there it's including when I listened to the interview with Michael Dean, and again I have forgot the channel where I looked at it on YouTube. You try to remember where you see all these things. I forgot which guy who did the interview, but it's a very good interview with Michael Dean that was done after the complete collapse of the Colontics in 2012. What happened there and how Michael Dean had experienced the whole situation being suddenly, I think they met him in Hawaii or Florida, or where was it? And within a week they had almost got engaged because they were interfered with by the different factions, as I call them, that were behind the teaching system that we now call the Colontic Sciences. So in the end, if we are to give credit to anyone, it's the Guardian Alliances. It is the teaching system of these groups. And my question has always been, who were these groups? Even though there were pictures out there that had been drawn, did they even look like that? Because I have not seen anyone that looks like that in my investigation of the different extraterrestrials and the different groups I have been in contact with. Not that I am giving off any of their scientific information or turning that into a teaching system. They're more than willing to, and they would love to, but I don't, because I don't want to seed their otherworldly sciences into our reality. Because I know from the Pillar Project that I was part of a long, long time ago in the solar system, long before the humanoids and the Syrian beasts and the crystallines and the Guardian Alliances and whoever they are of the humanoids groups were present in our solar system under the Ancient Ones. So that's from where I talk. That's where I have my information. I'm trying to get us back into what were the original solar system civilizations and not the humanoids that are part of the Guardian Alliances. For me, they are here trying to take something that's not theirs. They came in here as part of the Atlantean projects to redo and restore some of the fifth cycle or the fifth dimensional Syrian genetics, of which the crystallines are part, of which what we understand as their version of Christ consciousness come in play, or Christ consciousness as they later on turned it into. So with that understanding, it's kind of, that's all good and fine. But that's not where I'm speaking from. So that's also why I say what I am here telling you is not what what they have come up with. On the other hand, is to try to get rid of what they have come up with and say, that's humanoid. Could we please get things into the boxes where they belong? So we're kind of saying, well, we have the original solar system humanities that have been colonized and taken over, and they were the majority within solar system. And then we got colonized from the regressed races of the LPF2, or the artificial middle domain configurations. And then we got swamped with things that came in from other constellations around us that came here and became part of our solar system in their attempt to undergo different forms of restoration of their genetics that had begun the regression process due to the timeline event. And the reason why I also enjoy having read Alice Abela material, even though we could say she's from the Syrian A or the Great White Brotherhood, that we also know that, again, Ashana Dean in the interview with Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, the 3 videos that are there that amounts up to 5 hours or so, really good interview, by the way. It's clear that the Guardian Alliances are different types of Syrians that are opposing the already existing Syrian teaching systems that have been given here by the Buddhist teaching system, in my perspective, are from what we call the white elder lineages of the Syrians, some of the ancient ones that are also divided into the Celtic races, by the way. And then we have the Syrian A's that were more oriented in what we call the LPF2 area. The LPF1 were more the Syrian elders that work with the biofield. The LPF2s work with the middle domain, or what we call the artificial density 2 reality fields tied to the sun, where we get the prana sciences, the Hindu terminology, the Brahims, and all of these different branches that work with that. And then we have the Syrian B's that work with the different forms of mind field that came later on. They're very oriented towards technology. So these are the different groups, and the Syrian B's, they align more with what I call the 511 pillar that goes up to Vega, whereas the Syrian A's, they align themselves more with the Pleiadians, and this is how I remember it. And that's not in any books. This is my memory. So just because I use the same names for these species does not mean that I am taking that information from someone else. It's like talking about Africa. I just want to put that out. I know I already wrote a post about this, but I want to put this in here so we stop beating each other up with claiming copyrights of a terminology that stem from our solar system, that stem from our ancient civilizations. It's like trying to copyright that you know specific words within your human language. And I know this is American idea that if you write a book, then you have copyright on all the information that's in that book. But if that book is already taking language that others have used already, then you can't really make copyright claims on it because it's already there. Alice Bailey already used that language. The Blavatsky material also has language similar to it. Unfortunately, they did not work with the alien races. They work with devas. That's mostly the Syrian A's. They work with the astral plane entities. They work with the Hindu terminology that goes back to the Buddhist. And again, I would say Hindu terminology that goes back to the Buddhist terminology, because the original Buddhist teachings, they later on, not the original as in the oral tradition, but the ones that were written down, began to put into a system, a huge cosmology, where we have 33 different realms. They are the first to come up with the different cosmic realms, where there are different forms of entities. And the Buddha explored that. He called them specific names. And these were later on put into the Alice Abela material. So it's already present there. The only thing you need to decipher there is, okay, when she talks about these different entities, what is she actually talking about? That's where we today can say, well, perhaps all of these entities are actually extraterrestrials, which we have worked with in the different TV shows, what is on History Channel, that came up with ancient astronauts or ancient Sorry, again, it's 20 years. So, and you can say, Rand, we should look all of that up before you do a podcast. You could do that. Alien astronauts, look that up. History Channel, look it up yourself. There is so much you can learn from looking things up and finding it on the internet, and dig deep. You need to go through many of the layers. Now we have got all of this new stuff and nobody really knows what they're talking about because everybody's replicating everybody now. We're just rebranding all of these concepts that MUFON and other UFO groups came up with in the 80s. It's just been rebranded over and over again, and it's been changed and it's been watered out. So it's better to go back to some of the older material and see what were people actually talking about in the 80s before it became hip to talk about UFOs and put it out and film this or that or whatever. In these different forms of encounters, including also Stephen Greer's, which is also a huge source of information that's been put out there. Alex Collier used to be a huge source of information of the UFO and the different alien species, and his communication with the Andromedans from the Andromeda constellation, which were blue-skinned, which I see as a partly Syrian race because of the blue skin. So there are many people out there. There are many people over the course of time that came up with this information long before Ashana Dean brewed her books together and deliberately said so. And then you can go in and claim this is my material. Absolutely, you wrote it, but it's not new and it's not unique, because it's already been touched with from so many other peoples. What we could say that could be credited there was perhaps to gather it together into these books and come up with the alien agenda as a hostile agenda. That I will give the Guardians credit for, because the most of the material beforehand were talking about space brothers and space sisters that came in and assisted us. And I have not encountered much of that the last 15 years. That were to some degree before 2017, where we got linked up to the Dark Galactic Core. Before that, yes, definitely glimpses of what we could call benevolence. But after that, we were pushed so far into the Dark Galactic Core energy network that we literally became impossible to see anything that were benevolent. And the Guardian Alliances warned us about that too. So that is also to be put in. And that's also from the Carrie Cassidy Project Camelot interview with Ashana Dean, which you find for free on the internet. So go in and look up these 5 hours of interview if you want to understand the best of what, as far as I could see, what Ashana Dean and her material is about. That's my main source of what I refer to when I refer to anything. The schematics she came up with, I don't agree with that. I made up my own, as I saw it, in a different and more simplified manner. Her schematics, as I said, are very similar to what the Celtics used to work with. And these are some of the more, what we could call more the sacred books of the Celtic lineages, where you can actually navigate and calculate how the holographic network will be represented in certain, it's wrong to say times, because that's what it is, but within certain code sequences that align in a specific way when different code sequences conjunct with each other, specific type of holographic structures are then spawned to life that will then ignite different forms of what we could call foundational architecture that will allow for life to unfold. So this is also, so that's what I talk about. I want to begin to talk my own language, because my books, The Source of Humanity, I had to downsize my language so that it was not too far away. The Source of Humanity, the books I built, the free classes, they're bridges into this language. So why is this scientific language important? It is important because that is the language that will bridge between the base program conceptualizations and terminology with the higher order sciences of the advanced civilizations that from the future also are humans that do remember our ancient history, not just from this version of the solar system, but also tying it further back. I am not talking from the behalf of the humanoids. I am not talking on the behalf of the Sirian A's or the Sirian B's or the Pleiadians or the Orions or the ones from the Vega system or whoever and whatever was there. I talk from a branch of the true human lineages that comes from a completely different type of reality field altogether, because there are many different parallel reality fields here. So I want to put that one in here as well when we talk about what was the goal of my work and why did I even begun this. And then I kind of got entrapped, as I did for a time being when I was working with the Alice Bailey material. I got completely absorbed into it. I got entangled, and then I had to entangle my way out. I even met some of these quote unquote ascended masters that were there and as part of a holographic overlay, and behind that beautiful Jesus-like being, there was this little 1.5 meter tall shrunken Sirian A. In the later form they are mainly avian infused, whereas the Sirian B's are mainly raptoid infused. And raptoid does not necessarily mean Draco or reptilian. That's what they turn into later on. But they have different traits that goes with specific type of what we could call, the best way you can understand the raptoid genetics in the human body is the adrenal gland or the testosterone. The best way you can understand the avian genetics in the human form is oxytocin or serotonin. So they give specific markers, they give specific enzymes that allows for specific types of electrochemical processes that fires into the neural network and transform energy and consciousness into a specific pattern that allows for specific thoughts and emotional processes. So now you begin to see why I had to build all of these bridges. Not that we get stuck in, oh, these are the Bailey teachings material. No, that's just step of the path. Not that we say, oh, Souls of Humanity is the best book ever. No, that's just a step of the path. The other books, they are just bridges. They are all but bridges that bridges you from one layer to another, to another, to another. Because this is what expanded awareness is about. We work through a spectrum of energy. We work through different concepts and terminology that are useful on that level of our awareness, that is useful to express certain thought forms, that are useful to express certain neurochemical processes from where we can communicate with each other and understand each other. And then we must move beyond when we go into the next level, when we build a new type of structure in our brains, new neural networks, using new forms of energy from the holographic reality fields we are part of. And to really unfold their full potentials, we can use the principles of this solar system, and we can use the rules of engagement of this solar system, and we can use the natural laws of energy, how we are to utilize the energies of this solar system. Most of the teaching material that has been given so far are to teach the humanoids to take and twist and thwart the natural solar system energies into their liking, into their form of energy that belongs in the Sirian system. Go back home, people. If you don't want to play how things are here, stop colonizing us. They were invited here as part of the Pillar Project to undo what we could say the effects of the timeline event. They were the cause of the timeline event, and they came here first and foremost to try and assist in undoing the effects of the timeline event. But we already had the workstations here when they came. We were an advanced civilization when they came. And because of things that happened within the Pillar Project, they got allowances to work within what we understand as the Atlantean Project inside our solar system. And then the Dracos came, and then a whole other things happened. So this is the colonization. So I'm just one of the last ones standing from the original solar system civilizations. And I apologize for having made that mistake to try and bridge to the humanoids, because I've got nothing good of it. I have been shitstormed. I've been targeted. I think most of the attacks I have got has been because I tried to bridge to the humanoids, because what's left of the humanoids inside this system, especially now after 2017, are not interested in any ways or forms collaboration. What we understand is the following angelics. These are the superhuman programs that were begun by the Niburians. And there are different types of genetic modification programs back then, also as part of a project that were ongoing here and that were given allowance to work here. Not by my team, let me put it that way, but others that found that to be a good idea. The councils found that to be a good idea, because the true humans are very collaborative. We like to work in teams. We like to work with others because we believe in diversity. We believe in inclusivity. We believe in that we can help each other. And the Cyrenaeans, they were actually alongside with that, including the Pleiadians. Whereas we could say the Sirians and the Orions and whoever were part of the 511 pillars, since they were so oriented towards technology, they don't need the collaboration in the same manner because they have got technology that fixes everything, right? Duh. But I'm here being sarcastic. But that's how they think. And they rely more and more on technology and different forms of symbols and different forms of holographic insertions and holographic manipulation and holographic this and that, whatever, that runs by cube systems. That's part of the crystallines. They build everything up into cubes. That's why they called it matrices. Because that's what a cube can run. It can run that reality pattern that creates that reality field pattern where they utilize the nodal points to unfold artificial realities. And when I talk about I want to return to my language and where I began with the Souls of Humanity, what I meant was I began with Souls of Humanity because I wanted to build a bridge to the humanoids. And I have got nothing but bad experiences from it. So I'll just say, okay, perhaps I'll just put that on a shelf until they're later on, if they at all are ready. Similar when I went to Australia, my communication with the avians and the insectoids and the reptoids and whatever I met down there was all about, what about we figure this one out? What about we try to work this out together? And I did not have good response on that. So you can say, well, Randi, you're a representative of the councils, or you're anything here to in a way to connect to whatsoever. No, I'm just an original solar system citizen that kind of have remembered my rights due to the rules of engagement. Because in advanced civilizations, we all have the right to drum up councils. We all have the rights to meet up in holographic meetings. We can do that once we reach our expanded awareness. And that was another point of why I wanted to get back and out of the human mindset and the human neural network, because there you can't drum up councils. There you can't work with the holographic properties of reality. You can't expand your perception field into the full scope of what you're capable to do as a galactic or solar system citizen. Or as it's also been called when we talk solar systems, these are the middle domain civilizations. Or when we talk terrestrial systems, which are part of the outer domain that are close to where we shed off things where we no longer have use of. That's why the energies are so dense. That's why it's called density 1, so dense that the ramifications of what we're experimenting with will not affect the higher vibrational states and radiation code systems of the middle domains or LPF2. And the reason why I went with LPF1, LPF2, and LPF3, because they were part of the less progressive universal structures that were an experiment to try and assist the three lineages that did not make it the first run through, so to speak, of the universal cycles. But since they have, most of these have now turned into the regressed races, or what we could call the different variations of the humanoids, which they have become, there's no longer the need to call it LPF1, LPF2, LPF3. We can just say terrestrial, solar, and galactic. Or we could say outer domain, middle domain, inner domain. It doesn't matter the terminology. What matters is that if we do talk about terrestrial, solar, or galactic, then we understand we're talking with the human concepts of this realm, of this reality as it is now. But where we talk about outer domain, middle domain, and inner domain, and core domain, then we are talking about the original domains of the holographic realities. And that's also important when we talk about these different type of scientific levels and information systems. If we want to bridge them, we need to understand which terminology belongs to where, which thought processes do this terminology belong to, what kind of language do we use when we work with that form of energy. That's why different scientific branches have their own terminology, because it classifies that specific type of energy, that specific type of information, that specific type of pattern, that specific type of thought forms into a system of thought that works in a systemic manner to amplify each other within that pattern of information. So this is where we need to go. It's not about getting stuck into, the Syrians don't even call themselves the Syrians. They in their own language, there's something else. The Pleiadians don't even, because these names are something that we gave later on. If you go to another place on the planet, it's not called the Syrian system. It's called something else. It's not called the Pleiadians. It's called something else. I think some of the original native indigenous people, the indigenous people of America, was going to call them Native Americans, which they are not. The 12 tribes of the indigenous people of what now has been known as America, that was called something else originally altogether, and were not America until it was colonized by the Europeans and other people from around the world. Before that, there were groups there living that were the descendants of specific lineages that came from Atlantis. And they did not refer to the Pleiadians. I think they referred to it as the dogs or something like that, or something else. Again, look it up. I can't remember. Look up the Pleiadian system, the history of the Pleiadian system. What has it been called in different cultures? Look up the history of the Syrian system. What has it been called by different cultures? So we can't really say that concepts are tied to some kind of copyrighted teaching system, because we can change these concepts. And that was the idea with the Souls of Humanity, that I said, well, this information can also be verbalized in a different manner that gives a different perspective to the same information. Because we need to understand how words and energy and configurations and how different holographic properties affect the code systems that allows us to think and feel and sense in specific ways that are then activating different levels of our enzymes, are different types of neurosynaptic processes that allows us to expand our awareness in different directions. And we don't need different symbols and tones and songs and what have you to get along with that. Again, I'm here referring to some of the Kalontic material out there for free, which were to be found on the internet at the time, which I can't find anymore, so I can't give you where you can find it. But some of these things that were put out there in the 2009, 2010, what have you, before it all got taken away from the internet again after the complete collapse of whatever was going on with the Kalontic sciences in 2012. So that's also important to understand. And I know there are many people out there that are still sticking to that material. It has changed form. It has become something new, as everything does. Everything changes. I'm only referring to the oldest version of it, when we still had what was left of Anna Hayes as Speaker 1, where there was still Speaker 2 as Michael Dean before he was accused of this and that and what have you. Clearly, if you hear his story and his side of things, he's very confused of what actually happened, which I completely understand. because I don't think anybody really know what happened other than, and that's my insight into that one, is that whatever faction was behind that project decided it was time to do something else. And then they play shenanigans with us. Then they change whatever they want to. There is a MUFON interview with, again, a researcher. I can't remember her name. I will find and put under this podcast, that talks about how she has experienced in her regression with her clients that one guy one morning literally woke up and he had changed his priorities and his orientation from being an opposite sex type of guy into becoming same sex type of guy. And he lived with a partner for many years whom he loved very dearly, same-sex partner for many years, until the grays were done with him and he woke up the day after and then he was back to his original orientation. This is how strongly they can manipulate with us. They can make us see things, feel things, experience things. They can change our neurochemistry altogether, and they can change our electrochemical processes altogether. Dr. David Jacobs, he also was working with different clients, and he got many warnings of not to reveal the information that he revealed. I will put some of his podcasts below as well, because that is what we need to understand here in all of our processes, what we are up against. And I will give credit for the Guardian Alliances to give us that orientation and say, hey, humanoids or human alike, or present day type of humans, something is coming. Something is coming into your system. Something has already been there. And that's the only thing I can say that I agree on. I agree on the sun because I can see that, feel that, know that for myself as part of the new grand cycle, as I call it, as part of the resetting mechanism, as I talk about in the whole philosophy book, because that's part of the original solar system construction. It's not something the Guardian Alliances invented. They just gave us the information because we had forgotten it. Can we then copyright something that belongs to the construction itself? Can we copyright science and say, this is how quantum fields work? And then we copyright and say, because I discover that, then it's my information, nobody else can use it? That's not scientific, is it? That is segregation and division mechanics. So here we are talking about, we need to create a joint language where we build the bridge between who and what we are today, using our expanded awareness. I'm going to call that parapsychology, which I will work with in the Higher Order Density 1 Work Institute. There I begin to work with parapsychology. And the last pillar of the whole academy, aside from the progression sciences, that gives you the ability to reach expanded awareness, if you have the abilities for it, if you work for it, because nothing comes cheap in this work. Plus, well, we are up against the factions that now doesn't want us, that do not want us to activate at all, because they're colonizing our system. And then I got the second pillar that's all about the different Skype sessions, email sessions, energy system assessment reading, as well as a progression program. If you like, I can help you to put together a program of how you can progress. Not that I say you will succeed, because who will? Have I succeeded? I don't know. Who has? We don't know. We're here. We're stuck in this realm, aren't we? So we're still in the process of figuring out how to deal with these things. Because once we master it, we are out of here, right? we don't live to tell the tale. We are out. We shed off this form and we move on. And then the last pillar will be what I call the parasciences, where I'll give up some of the ideas that I have from the future civilizations that will come out of this civilization that has the possibility to work with our reality field in a different way. And I would like to seed that in, because it is a strong possibility for some of the ones that do achieve their expanded awareness. And that's why I began a long time ago. The whole point was to change the future. Not all of this struggle I've had with the humanoids the last 10 years. including the struggles we already had with the regressed races, including the struggles we had with religion as part of the LPU project. That's why I say I was tired of it already from the get-go. And I'm not less tired of the humanoids. I'm more tired than ever because of their constant interference, their constant try to claim sovereignty and allowances that are not theirs to begin with. Claiming this is their solar system. It never was and never will be. They have their own home systems, but they have messed them up. They have demolished them, and that's why they want this. And they are demolishing this one to the same degree they demolished their own solar systems, called stellar systems in our terminology. So that is where we are. And that's why we need humans that do the progression work, not because you want to get abilities or powers or get spiritual insights or whatever drives us. What drives me is first and foremost to get back to who and what I was, because I know why I'm here. I talk about that in the perception logs. I also know that what I am now was not what I came here to be. I'm not voluntarily in this form. It came to be so. And then you say, oh, Randi, you're walking. No, I didn't choose it. It's a punishment. And that's also important to understand. Some of the reasons why it's difficult for us to prosper is because of the programs we have been put into. And that's why in the older days, we have kind of got this imprisonment, enslavement. I know it's an I and an E, but we kind of play on the same where they are, right? So it's kind of why we're here. And that's also part of why it's difficult for us to activate and wake up. That understanding that the colonizing races that are here, they don't want us to wake up. So that should be thrown into the mix as well. So we truly understand the difficulties of this work. Why so many say, well, I've done this for years. It's not given anything. No, because whatever's going on here are not really allowing us to do so. So there are different strategies we must take into consideration as well. And the original Buddhist teachings, they work with 3 different forms: the Buddha, Bodhisattva, and the Thunderbolt path. So these are also to be worked with, these different aspects. So I've decided when I talk about the parapsychology, I will dive into my remembrance of what I was taught of the Buddhist teachings, because I remember more of that life. And there's a reason why I remember that. And then I will work with what I was taught, not what you can find in the Buddhist text today, but what I was taught. And I will work with the teachers of the outer domain of the holographic teaching system that belongs to the ancient one of the original sciences of the solar system. As I have worked with the teachers and the holographic teaching system under the ancient ones of the middle domain of the solar system, as is part of my transition sciences and my template sciences, the holographic architecture behind our physical form. And that is part of the original solar system humanities, not the humanoids, not the lunars, not the Syrians, not the Pleiadians, not the Orions, not the vegans, and not anyone here that claim that they have the sole right to exist here. They came here to be part of certain restoration programs and decided to colonize this system. So with that little continuation of the process of progression, we have now got into what we could call beginning the strategies of progression and why we're doing what we're doing. Thank you.